what I bring to the table as strategic designer is the understanding between the different levels that organizations are now forced to work within. So understanding that the gaps between the operational and the tactic levels are important to emphasize to get employees on board, that the gap between tactics and strategics are important in management, and the gap between strategic and what I sometimes call the strategic narrative, or the understanding of systems you're part of, is super important when it comes to leadership and strategic leadership. Whereas normally companies focus on, so what is our vision? What is our mission? Like, all these things, right? But bridging them together and getting sort of a coherent understanding of that all these things are connected and that you need to zoom in and out seems super relevant for companies at this time.
Designing the future is essential for shaping the world we want to live in. That's why it's more crucial than ever to be strategic about it, think long-term, and embrace complexity rather than avoid it. The field of strategic design is growing, and as two strategic designers, we want to explore how it's changing the way we design products, buildings, organizations, and landscapes. In this podcast, we'll interview strategic designers and professionals in the field, hoping to enlighten both ourselves and others about the future of designing with a strategic mindset and skill set. We're Emily and Isaac, both strategic designers with different backgrounds. Isaac is an industrial designer from Finland, and Emily has a business background in design culture and economics from Denmark. Join us for today's conversation with our guest, where we'll be unfolding strategic design. Welcome to today's episode. We're joined by Brian Frandsen, an independent strategic designer. Brian wears many hats. He works as a consultant at the Danish Royal Academy, where he is specialized in concept design, project and design management. In addition, Brian runs his own label, Frandsen &, where he explores his work as both a designer and an artist. Brian holds a bachelor's degree in industrial design and a master's in industrial and product design from the Kolding School of Design. His extensive experience includes roles as program director and senior strategic designer at the Danish Design Center, as well as teaching positions at KEA, the Copenhagen School of Design and Technology, and the Scandinavian Design College. Welcome, Brian. And thank you so much for joining our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To a start, could you introduce yourself to our listeners? What do you do for a living?
Yes, of course. I think your introduction was really nice. And I think that emphasizes also how I see myself as a professional. Usually I say I have a portfolio career in the sense that I do quite a lot of different things. And I think that's very common in the field of design. So as you mentioned, I have a part-time employment at the Danish Royal Academy, where I work with further and continued education, so the postgraduate programs that we do there, helping develop those, but also teaching a little bit. Then I have my own one-man consultancy firm where I do mainly strategic advisory and facilitating strategic processes for companies and organizations that works mainly with sustainability. And then on the side, as you mentioned, I have this thing of Frandsen & which is a really old entity in many ways that I'm actually working on transforming a bit. This is where I do my own label of accessories, mainly in leather. And now also I just launched a small brand based on my beloved dog, Siggy. It's called Siggy Long Dog, doing dog accessories in leather mainly.
Cool. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's new.
Yeah. That's new. Congratulations on that. So you're educated as an industrial designer from the Kolding School of Design. What have you learned from studying industrial design?
I think the funny thing about me studying at a design school was that I had no idea what it was about when I started. And the first year for me at the Kolding School of Design was quite hard because I come from a very sort of maybe academic inclination when it comes to education, and understanding what design and the whole artistic practice was about was a little bit tough for me to get around. So I have this picture of a sort of almost an epiphany in my first year at the design school, where we were doing art subjects. We're working on composition, and I was leaning against the light table in the workspace, completely frustrated about not understanding organic composition that you probably know quite a lot about as well, because it was so organic and there was no rules and stuff. And I was used to working within the lines, doing what I was told. But here the the guidelines were so fluffy that I couldn't really get my head around how to attack this assignment. And then I suddenly realized, okay, so maybe it's about exploring the gray zones. So where you don't have any restrictions, where there are room for actually making something new and going with the flow and experimenting. So I ended up just letting go of everything I thought I was supposed to do, and then going with whatever I thought was right and what actually worked. So I redid that whole semester of work around art practice, and ended up understanding that maybe design is about exploring what is not yet there, both in terms of guidelines, but also in the connections between things. And after that, I was sort of on a roll, understanding that maybe design is doing exactly what I always sort of tried for, or at least was looking for in my life and my work. That going with curiosity into exploring where there was no restrictions, where you could actually make structures for creating something new. And that story and that anecdote, and I probably changed it. Maybe it didn't happen exactly that way. You know how your mind works in that sense, but it at least always kept me also in my future work as working more with processes and systems and strategic design. Always coming back to, so it's all about that artistic practice of exploring what you don't know, being curious about the gray zones and those spaces in between that nobody has yet filled in with content or concepts or solutions. So I think that's the main thing I learned from my studies in the industrial design. And then obviously also spending those long hours in the workshops, in the wood workshop and the metal workshop, getting an understanding of how things work, how shaping, like giving form, works, which is also something that really stuck with me as a skill that everyone should get a hang of. I mean, you can't really do any system work if you don't have an understanding of how the three-dimensional work around it works. So I have nowadays I don't spend much time in workshops making things, but it's one of the things that always I really want to go to the workshops. And whenever I'm at the academy going through the workshops, it itches. I just want to make stuff. And I think that's characteristic for all of us working in the field of strategic design, that is still a big part of how we approach solution making and filling in those gaps, those gray zones.
I think it's also interesting to hear because Isak studied the same industrial design, but then in Lund, and it sounds quite different, right? Then it was less abstract, at least, right, Isak? Or how was your study?
Yeah, my experience, it was less abstract, actually. Very, very strict rules in a sense on how you should design a product for a mass production. Though I was longing for trying out the gray zones, but that didn't always work that well. So I thought that was interesting. And when I did then the Strategic Design Masters program, there I could actually feel that I could, have a different lens on and approach problems from a different view and maybe not assume that the solution is a product.
Interesting. It just inspires me, something that I've been thinking quite a lot about when it comes to the development of the design field or the design practice, that it's coming from quite a lot of different, you would say professional foundations. So you have the artistic-based design practice that comes very much from schools of, like the academy and the Kolding School of Design. And you also have the more engineer-based ones. At least in Denmark, you have DTU, the Technical University, and you also have the humanistic ones coming from traditional universities, and then you have the business one that you sort of representing coming from business schools. And I feel there's a lack of collaboration between those when it comes to design. I think maybe strategic design is trying, at least in a way, to combine some of those practices. And I think you might be a good representative for someone who's been in both of these oceans, also encompassing some of these practices coming both from a more traditional industrial design field, but also bringing that service design strategic level to it.
Yeah. Exactly. But in your case, after graduating from the industrial design program, how did you proceed from there? How did you get into the more like strategic design field?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's two perspectives to that. One is, I think maybe I had a bit of a fear of the more artistic product design field, because my intuition told me that it was a tough field to get a job in and to get a career in. And then it's always been quite easy for me to do the more abstract and more sort of strategic approach to things. And then my first job actually ended up being at the Kolding School of Design, where I became a project manager at a project around sustainability in the development department. And that was when I met for real sustainability as a strategic challenge, working with companies around redesigning their business models towards more responsible productions and stuff like that. And it was quite easy for me to step into that field, which then made it sort of without knowing it at the time, but looking back, it was quite evident that it became a mission for me to figure out, so what are the boundaries of design? So where could you try and use design as a methodology or an approach to solving things in areas where it hadn't really been dominant at that point? And that raised like a curiosity for me that just kept on staying there. I don't know. And then, to be honest, I always had this idea, I really wanted to do products again. But there was always something that was easier for me to approach. There was always a place for me to get a job or get a gig where it was about not the material part of design, but more the methodology of or applying that methodology towards other areas. So, and I still have that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still like, that's why it's itching whenever I approach a workshop.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's an interesting little tension you got there. And also the interesting how you approach it now as an independent strategic designer who then has sort of the freedom to actually give in some spaces, and in some spaces it's processes.
Most definitely, yeah.
At that time, was sustainability already a topic and a field that you wanted to work with, or was that something new to you?
At that point, it was not completely new. We already at that point had some courses doing my education on sustainability and design. But to be honest, I felt it was a little bit hard to get my head around, because it was also, I mean, the idea of being a product designer and then getting told that you should actually make less products. And that was hard for me to sort of step in, because I was very passionate about product design at that point. But what I realized in my first job working with sustainability and strategy was that there is so much more for design to do within that field. And I think also I realized, digging a little bit more into the state of the world, that this was something that we needed to address as designers as well. If not it becoming the focus of everything we do. And this is back in 2012. So there was not much mainstream talk about sustainability at a strategic level, but it was starting slowly to come around. So my work was also at that point trying to get businesses to understand that this was important, that they needed to put focus on it. And by doing those sales pitches to companies why this was important, I maybe also in a way convinced myself that this was important. Yeah, but at the moment I was like, about sustainability. Let's just do some cool products.
Yeah. Let's get out there.
Yeah.
How did the companies, or at that time, was it difficult to also introduce sustainability as like a crucial part of also running a business or designing a product? Or how was that received?
I think it was received or conceived from company size more as a trend at that point. So looking at it as a selling point to make a point like communication wise for the company. So I remember with some of the companies I defined a level 0 in going towards sustainability in companies, which I talked mostly, that was the main focus of that project. It became that focus, is having companies understand that they should make better products in order for them to take market shares from their competitors. That became the sort of the storytelling. And to do that, they needed to be proud of what they did and put integrity and pride into the products they did. And that was harder than I thought. Making management and the leadership in these companies realize that they had to include their employees in that sort of approach as well. And that was level 0, just realizing, okay, we need to be proud of what we do and do really high quality stuff in order to start taking sustainability into how we do things. But at that point, sustainability was also quite narrow. I mean, in the sense that we talked about recycling, we talked about reducing waste, efficiency and stuff like that. That was the main focus of sustainability at that point.
Yeah, and then it sort of leveled up to product services, product systems and stuff like that.
Yes.
And now it's also business models and entire like organizations, how they operate, right?
Yes, yeah, and ecosystems and
Exactly. Expanding from there. How did you sort of grow within this transition? What resources did you use? Did you educate yourself even more, or was it more through the jobs that you had along the way that you developed yourself also as a strategic designer?
I think it's a combination. I think, there's definitely sort of formal skill sets within design and strategic design that you need to develop through continuous enhancing your skills. But there's also an experience-based price, which is maybe not valued as much as it should be. Just like you become a better woodworker, you become a better 3D drawer, you become better at drawing and sketching. With practice, you also become better at understanding and being able to zoom in and out on big systems and details. So your level of your ability to expand on your view on things becomes greater with experience. So I think how I approach it has been a lot by trial and error in the work and the jobs I've been doing, but also studying and being curious about what is going on at both theoretical but also quite operational level within system theory, within facilitation, within organizational structures, within leadership, and all these things. And then I think it's a skill, or I think that most designers are really, really good at is getting excited about things they don't understand in other branches and other fields of work. So that the hunger for learning about things that is outside of your scope is also for me a key skill or resource for keeping myself relevant, and also that understanding of what it is I'm doing.
And now, as a strategic designer, where you now practice, you could say, as an independent strategic designer, can you give us some examples of what you do, projects that stand out?
So at the moment, I don't know what's going on, but at the moment, I'm working on quite a lot of strategy developing projects. So helping organizations systemize their approach to making strategies and also implementing strategies. And I think what stands out as me is what I bring to the table as strategic designer is the understanding between the different levels that organizations are now forced to work within. So understanding that the gaps between the operational and the tactic levels are important to emphasize to get employees on board, that the gap between tactics and strategics are important in management, and the gap between strategic and what I sometimes call the strategic narrative, or the understanding of systems you're part of, is super important when it comes to leadership and strategic leadership. Whereas normally companies focus on, so what is our vision? What is our mission? What is our blah, 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 all these things, right? But bridging them together and getting sort of a coherent understanding of that all these things are connected and that you need to zoom in and out seems super relevant for companies at this time. Also understanding sustainability and all the other sort of overarching context they need to be dealing with now and in the future. So that stands out as something that I might earlier have thought of as a bit boring, but now seeing like, okay, you can actually change how companies and how organizations and how communities they work. Then I have my darlings that are also those projects that it's hard to get funding for, or at least it's hard to get the private entities to pay for that work. And that is some of the stuff I also do at the academy together with different research and staff out there. As one of them is Ida Ingholm, a professor at the Institute of Visual Design. And we've been working on this initiative called Planetary Dreaming, where we work with speculative design as an approach to have people dream about the future of either their business or their lives, and then backtrack from that into strategies and actions. And one particular project that I'm super into right now is part of this initiative, but about the fashion industry in particular, called Fashion Dreaming. We just opened an exhibition last week at the Design Museum in Denmark. We're showing 6 future narratives generated by AI, but based on the dreams of 100 people working in the fashion industry, working as a tool for the fashion industry to start having a collective idea about where they want to go, and then backtrack from those future visions into strategies, tactics, and operations within individual companies. And I think what stuck out for me is like, okay, what strategic design really is able to do is to both be a strategic toolkit that companies can use that would affect their actions and in everyday life, but also be able to be exhibited at a museum because it has visual appeal. It talks to people in a way that they understand it, and it creates a shared language that is not only based on the profession that you're in. So that's something I'm looking forward to further develop over the coming years.
Wow.
What was your role in creating these fashion dreams, and how did you? What was your role in between like these different people and using AI as a tool? Could you briefly explain about what you did in that project?
Yes, it's going to be a bit of a geek alert, but it started with Else Skjold, who's a researcher within fashion at the Danish Academy, asking me if I wanted to do something with her during Fashion Week in last summer, together with the business and together with the organization of Fashion Week. And then we talked a little bit about, so okay, how could we start these people dreaming a little bit more about the future? Because the problem with the fashion industry that they have a really short-term focus. They look at like from season to season. They never give themselves the room to think a little further. And then we developed the idea that let's have them write down personal dreams. And then I didn't have much time, and then we didn't have much money to do this. So I was thinking, okay, so how can we, the most efficient way, turn these data into something useful? And then I thought, okay, I also want to learn how to use AI a little bit more. So maybe I'll just practice and see how far can I get with just using AI, ChatGPT to everything. So we did a workshop during Fashion Week where the business came in. And no, I actually started with, I did facilitated a workshop with the graduating students from fashion, having them write down their dreams in a template. And then the researchers at the academy working with fashion, they did the same thing. And based on those stories, I fed it into ChatGPT and said, here are 15 dreams from the future of fashion. Can you make 3 stories that sort of take elements of that and put it into themes and then telling it out of the same template? And they did that really easily, and they became actually quite nice stories with really concrete ideas about what is going to happen over the next couple of decades. And then I fed that. Then I asked ChatGPT to make a profile for each of the storytellers of those 3 stories, having it make a prompt for Midjourney to make a visual representation of that person. And then I did the portrait in Midjourney, and then I took that portrait and the script, put it into another AI machine that makes these talking head videos, and had that portrait actually tell the story as coming from the future, as a retired professional within the field. So it was all done. I didn't curate anything. AI just did all the work, which was quite fascinating, starting from a purpose of making it efficient to purpose thinking like, that's a really nice way to not put my own biases into dealing with massive data from a workshop. So we showed those 3 videos during Fashion Week with around 50 people or something, and had them discuss from that. So what would they do in their companies if this future was the one that we're looking into? And then we had them fill in new personal dreams. And then I used that, fed that into the AI again, then created 10 new stories based on themes. I had ChatGPT then also say, okay, define 3 really concrete strategies that companies could do today to realize this future. And then it did that, like coming up with some really good suggestions for it. So I've been, in that sense, my question was in the beginning, my design question. So what could we do using dreams as a foundation? What could we do to spark inspiration and the long-term perspective of the fashion industry start transforming? And then I just tried different things out, whereas the AI became sort of my test ground. And realizing, hey, there's a concept here that actually works, that people react to, that actually speaks to people. So I think also it being a baby project for me is also because I had the chance to play around a little bit with a lot of gray zones to dig into, right?
That, to me, that sounds like a perfect example on how interesting AI could be for strategic designers, especially when you need to create something based on like a large amount of data and also more rapidly create these different concepts. And after this experience that you had, are you now using AI more frequently, or have you kind of left that to this project and doing project now differently?
No, I use it all the time because it's a great, especially when working a lot by yourself, as I'm doing. It's a great partner in crime in the sense that it gives you something to play ball against. I would never think of having AI take decisions for me, but it can challenge my decision making, and it can challenge others' decision making, and it can also, in the sense of what is interesting with the Fashion Dream project that could be used anywhere else, is giving AI the chance to put something on the board and people can react to, and they will not see, okay, it's Brian, and I know that Brian is thinking this kind of way. I mean, it's coming from a machine that you could hate, but you cannot really claim that it has a personal agenda, at least in a sense. So in that sense, it's super interesting, and I think it's super important that not just the 3D design, but everybody gets familiar about this technology and getting a better understanding of the positive and negative sides of working with it.
And with Planetary Dreaming, how important is the collaboration with the Royal Danish Academy? And how does that collaboration look like? Are they bringing the research mostly? Or can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that the Planetary Dreaming Initiative is trying to gap some of the research within sustainability and design with how you actually then do it and how you communicate it and how you make it work in real life. So my role working with the researchers there is translating it into concepts that can be understood and that could also be acted upon. And I think that's the cool thing about design research, maybe in particular at the Royal Danish Academy, but also other places, is that it's very tied up on real life and on action-based research. So it's really easy to make that translation. So it's a little bit weird the way that we organize Planetary Dreaming, because it's actually a bit on the side of the academy. So it's not sort of an official research center or cluster, but it's something where it's sort of a platform of experimenting, bringing people in from outside, having a dialogue with what is going on in the research field of design, but also having a dialogue with those real life designers who are trying to make a difference. And I think design is all about asking questions, right? So the Planetary Dreaming starts from another place where we usually start asking questions about sustainability and design, because we're asking the question, so is there a place for humankind in the world that is sustainable? Sort of bringing in the planetary perspective on what it means to be human. So instead of asking, how do we transform into a more sustainable way of living? We're asking, so from the beginning, could we imagine there's a kind of humanity that could be a sustainable species on planet Earth? So we're bringing the context of the planet to begin with and then tracking down. So if we could imagine that, what would characterize humankind at that point? How do we then make initiatives, strategies, businesses that aligns with them? And that's obviously a sort of a mindfuck in many ways.
Yeah.
Getting you to ask the big questions. And it's a big experiment in many ways. But I think that's the crucial question we need to ask if we want to better understand what is our role as a species in on this little spaceship called Earth.
And who do you invite to these workshops? Is it primarily designers, or who is like the target participant?
Well, not only designers, but maybe people that have a trade of working designerly in the way that they ask those questions about what is their role within the systems they're working in. So it's people that are already engaged in the agenda of change, consultants working by themselves. It's also leaders of bigger companies that are starting to question if they have a role as a company and organizations in 50 years. And then it's obviously a lot of thinkers. It's harder to get doers to go into these contexts at this point, at least. But that's the purpose of projects like Fashion Dreaming as well, inviting those people in with design. So making design products, you might say, or artifacts like Fashion Dreaming videos to invite them into asking some of these questions.
That also actually sort of relates to my next question about what is the most challenging aspect of what you do. Because as you say, the practitioners are the ones creating sort of the products, or I would also say maybe the ones in the decision making, because we have also outsourced most of our design work to Asia, etc. So it's like, how do we engage or activate the ones who actually make the decisions or who create the products, and not only the thinkers? Yeah,
it's a really good question. And that's obviously the challenge. And I think that relates back to why I think working with strategy consultancy is super important, because it is bridging those gaps. So making it trickle both down and up in the systems that we already have, coming from those that are really the practitioners and the decision makers on an everyday level, up to the level where there's a connection, or at least a nesting into the bigger systems of things. And it's not like everyone has to go around and think about the planetary ecosystems and how they relate to it, but it's giving sort of connecting those big perspectives with what goes on in real life. And that is a big challenge. And I think it's definitely also something that created quite a lot of frustration for me in the work that I'm doing, because I have a hard time maybe gathering those things also in my own mind and in my own practice. And what I've been focusing on lately is, so there is probably a mirroring going on in every one of us, representing that connection. So working with inner sustainability is maybe a key also to make that real. So working with creating thriving lives for those people practicing making decisions, as you say, might be a key to also opening up those connections to a bigger ecosystem. Now I'm just blabbling because it is also some of the things that I'm exploring right now that I don't really understand, but it's definitely a mirroring. But what do you think? I mean, you're practitioners and also moving as maybe more fresh from the field of design into what is your experience with these connections?
First of all, I just want to add to your point that I see more and more, but I'm also in the LinkedIn vacuum of my own algorithms, but I see more and more of these inner development workshops and processes in more corporate organizations. So that's interesting. I think regenerative leadership and this entire system around regeneration has also there's a more larger consensus around that it's relevant to look at also as leaders in corporate organizations, because they can see the value of integrating these principles for their employees, basically. So it's both that development and those work processes that are happening. I see that coming around. And then now I work in the construction industry, in the built environment, and that industry is also facing tremendous challenges. And you could say that there are many actors in the industry that currently really want more radical change, want more a more radical push towards actually making a transformation, for instance, in the material aspect of it, to build with bio-based materials, let's say that, or integrate more circular processes. The politicians are not quite there in terms of creating politics that support it, which is right now the tension. But many actors have signed, for instance, the agreement on reduction roadmap that they would like the threshold to be lower in terms of the CO2 emissions and the LCA count on that. So that is showing that the pull or the push is there, but we sort of need also the regulations to follow on and for the market to also sort of react because there is still a huge dominant market where the big actors are still the ones sort of deciding in which direction we actually do go. And then from my perspective as well, I see that geopolitics are creating so much trouble and mess that we have to insource. We have to look locally. We have to really figure out how do we create a very solid foundation where we are, which creates some opportunities for companies to also look more locally, to be more closely related to what they're actually doing, who are they serving and such. So I see a transition. I see some actions that go in that direction. And then there is also a big amount of actors who are just very business as usual and protecting their assets and stuff. What do you say, Isaac? What happens in Helsinki at the moment?
I think I'm bouncing between having a very optimistic view on it and then that we need more a radical change and need to push more. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that we are at least thinking about these things. And quite many are also now in the transition or in the position of making change. That's quite radical already. And I think that it's so easy to assume that everybody needs to be or should be on the same level. To build something new is very difficult. And then to just maintain it is even more difficult. And then to actually change it can be even more difficult than that. We have access to all these, beautiful products that we have on the shelf that we can just, buy for cheap. But the road that they have to go through to actually get those products to the shelf, it's very difficult. And there's a reason why not everybody is able to do it.
Yeah. To niche to mainstream is the tricky part. That's definitely for sure. But there is an interesting perspective here, I think, in terms of strategic design and the role of a strategic designer. Because so far we've interviewed 4 people, including you, Brian, actually 5. And we have 5 people now within different areas, within architecture, a designer like you, and business developer and such. But there is sort of a red thread in between all these different positions and people who identify themselves as strategic designers. And that is that you're all facilitating the change for various actors. Not only are you in sort of the activistic realm, you're also really working with the corporate world, I should say. Then you have your strategy process work there. And then you have the Planetary Dreamers sort of more experimenting, maybe more on the side of the system, right? So I think there is some interesting thing here that strategic designers really do take the existing practices and sort of try to change those practices in many different ways. But could you see, for instance, the Planetary Dreamers project, that whole format that it's in now, could you see that also be a format or medium you could use with the corporate world? Could they also be planetary dreamers?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things in what both of you just said. I think Emilie, you're totally right that it's not just a core discipline for strategic designers to engage different kinds of people and different levels and different sort of approaches to life and what they're doing. I think it's a very core design discipline. You could say there are 2 perspectives on design in general. There's the very sort of vertical one where you have a handcraft. So you're a fashion designer, you're a furniture designer, you're a service designer, where you have a skill set and a craft within a specific field. You have a material you're working with. And then there's the horizontal one that sometimes we call the enabling design practice, which is actually building bridges between different disciplines and integrating them into each other to create a more sustaining change or a sustaining solution. And I think strategic design is very much about engaging that discipline within the design field, so that becoming a facilitator of different perspectives and approaches to what we're doing. And planetary dreaming is exactly that. It's trying to bridge those things when talking about sustainability at the very highest level you could imagine. Trying to figure out, so if this enabling design discipline needs to move from being human focused to planetary focused, what kind of facilitation or what kind of tools, what kind of form giving would we need to apply? What kind of change of perspectives do we need to put into being designers to enable and bridge and facilitate different approaches within the perspective of planetary solution making? And that's fairly new. And that's super hard because, as you say, it's like this, just getting products on a shelf, making them actually compete and having people buy them, making sustainable living out of it for those doing that is super hard. Imagine taking another perspective into that and moving systems up, taking those systems into consideration as well. I mean, it is super hard. I saw this research done by a guy called Rohn. I don't know if he's German or whatever, but he's making these levels of regenerative development. That is the most concrete way of looking at regenerative practices I've seen. And he's talking about the operational level. So keeping the lights turned on or just doing everyday things like you're doing your product design or whatever. Then there's the maintaining level. So keeping a stable system around that so you can keep doing that. And then there's the developing level on top of that. So that's creating new things that adapt to the immediate context around it. And then there's the regenerative one where you start building value into other systems around you. And those levels are very similar to general strategic work, but it's a completely different framing. So what do we do at a tactic level to maintain the way that we could deal with it or keep doing what we're doing? And how do we develop so that we stay relevant in the context we are working. So that's the normal sustainability at this point. The regenerative level here is then, how do we look at us as something doing better, developing into becoming that new kind of humankind, and understanding that systems nesting into each other. Now, not understanding, maybe accepting that we always systems nested into other systems could also give us a bit of a calm, saying like, it's okay what I do now, because I know that I'm nested into other systems that an influence on me, but I can also influence that from where I'm standing. So you don't have to get out and look at the entire planetary system. You can also just work from where you are and see what happens. And if there's something we're good as designers, is to approach these kind of open spaces with the curiosity about, I wonder why the system is affecting my system this kind of way. I wonder if I do this in my little system, how would that affect the systems around me? And explore that and experiment with that. And I think that's what the best way we can approach staying sane in what we're talking about now. Planetary dreaming is trying to expand that curiosity. And so if I do this change, if I use my ability to imagine things, how does it affect the systems around me? And how is the big system now affecting me? So I was asking a question, what kind of embeddedness am I in? Also sort of embracing what I think we all know by now is that our modern way of living has also given us a harder time hoping and yearning for a better future, and engaging that muscle in dreaming about what could be and experimenting up against it. And I know that it's a really, really tough time at the moment, looking at what happens in the US, for example. I think that's helping us to also realizing that the world could be different, but we need to yearn for something.
Yeah, that's true. And I can personally say that I get reminded, or I accept the ecosystem I'm in every summer when my caterpillars eat my cabbage.
Yeah.
And that's a good reminder of accepting other species also needs food. And I can't avoid it.
It's a really good point. I think that's, dwelling into those small experiences of connectedness. That's really what we need to do a lot more.
But that also requires time, right? And that's also the issue we also have as a species. Like we work so much and we do not necessarily prioritize to grow a garden or to sit and watch all the insects come to the garden and do their job basically, and also appreciate that. We try to avoid them because we don't want them to interfere with the small amount of time we have for growing vegetables or whatever we do. So it's also like, it is such a systemic problem we have here. It's the matter of how much we work, what value we create there, and all these things.
Yeah, but you can find these moments everywhere. I think product designers at least, are very well connected to that because they have a relationship with the material they're working with. I mean, they're touching it, they're understanding it by connecting to it. And when you look into your fridge and seeing something that is about to rot, that is also connecting to something bigger than yourself, right? So maybe also taking those moments to appreciate when the world around you actually gives you a chance to connect to something bigger than yourself,
yes,
sort of in a fractal way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think that's super important.
Yeah, embrace the rotten food.
Yeah, exactly. Study it before you throw it out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. See if you can grow even more mold on it. What motivates you in your work, Brian?
Curiosity motivates me. I think that realizing that there'll always be interesting things to dig into, I think that motivates me. As you maybe also sense from how I'm talking about things, I always get into a place where I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think that motivates me. When I feel really insecure about what I'm doing, it's a motivation and a frustration. Working on that edge I think what most of us as professional designers, it's sort of a masochistic kind of approach to your work life. Because it's the same thing, that frustration that all of us as product designers at least know from the workshop, when we are like, okay, the deadline is in a minute and I'm still having 1,000 variables I haven't decided upon, right? And then you work all night and then you end up with something amazing anyway. And then starting to trust that that thing will come, and then staying with the troubles and sort of being in that moment of frustration that also drives you to move on and progress. And I think that tension and that friction is maybe my biggest motivation.
That's funny to hear. The core sentence for our master when we did it was trust the process. Right, we used it a lot, at least in my group.
Yes,
it's like really.
I had a teacher at the Designskolen Kolding who always said, when we're doing group work, he said the project is the leader. Remember, so listen to the project, make it do what it says.
Yeah, does it sound familiar, Isaac? I know that you also have transitioned and jumped into a new field yourself.
Always trust the process. Always. No, but it's funny. I just briefly want to also comment on, or maybe ask again, that when for example working with the deep dive project or being a part of, and just again briefly explain what that is, but also have these thoughts and topics around sustainability and regeneration. Is that also something that is discussed there, and in what kind of realms are you talking about that? Is it again that you just need to change a little bit here and there, or are people, leaders in the field really into, making radical change?
So I think intellectually, most leaders by now, or those, maybe we would call them decision makers, are actually up for making radical change, and knowing by now that we're in a time where we will be forced to change quite a lot of things, but they feel really uncomfortable stepping into it, and they are very insecure about what to do and how to approach it. So I sense there's a growing demand for looking for answers and perspective from different areas. Like part of Planetary dreaming and the whole thing we're doing there is also combining traditional wisdom from indigenous people into the thinking of development and design, or innovation and design. And that resonates with quite a lot of people at decision-making levels, because that's connecting with a bigger truth about the world and what it means to be human in it. But still, it gives quite clear guidelines and principles of how to approach it. So it's about connectivity. It's about the long-term perspectives. It's about the zooming in and out approach. And we just, part of the Planetary dreaming and the work of Ida Engholm is a methodology called Designwise, which we actually just made this book. We just published this book. It's not for sale yet, but it's coming. It's a handbook of a methodology that is based on the medicine wheel of the North American indigenous people. That gives you different ways of being in the world. And I think decision makers and managers and leaders, they need to acknowledge that leadership and decision making needs to come from different ways of being and acting. So here there are 8 perspectives or approaches to taking decision. One based on sort of a mindful letting go of what you already know and explore what you dream of. One that is more sort of what we work with in ideation. So that's the spring part where we are exploring potentials and exploring seeds of possible solutions or decisions. And then summer, which is where we do the hard work. So where we go to the workshop, where we actually do the things, we go to the field and we take care of it, we nurse it, we don't ask questions about whether this is the right thing or not, we're just doing the thing. And then fall, where we are contemplating, first of all, we are harvesting the value of what we've been doing, then we're contemplating and trying to understand, so is this working or not? what kind of value did hard work bring us? And then going back to winter and north, where we sort of let go of all the failures we did and asking the question, should we bring on to the next cycle of things? And what you can see from you knowing a little bit about design thinking, and design is very similar to a design process, but bringing different perspectives into it that is less about linear innovation processes, but understanding that things are connected. As leaders, you know that working with people, that people work in cycles, and every process you go through is just the beginning of the next process. And I think leaders and managers are starting to look for these kind of narratives and looking for these kind of ways of understanding their job in transition, and also giving them a bit of comfort that whatever they do, there's another go at it. And it's a step-by-step process, but you can see it scale up into these nested systems that they're part of.
What a nice way of also maintaining curiosity as well, so that you don't fall into the same loop of only doing.
I think that has a lot of it resonates a lot also with the people that I meet, also bringing mindfulness practices and stuff like that into it. Being very aware of where you are at what point in the process.
When is the book launched?
Actually, it's in a digital version. It's already on planetaryDreaming.org, but then we just got it from print. And this one is in Danish. We got it in print last week, and then we'll be launching an English version in hopefully in the fall, but maybe in the spring. We need to translate it, and we have a publisher on it already, but we need some funding for it. This is a handbook, so it's very sort of process oriented, and how you could facilitate these kind of processes by yourself.
Super interesting. It also aligns quite well with some of the discussions we have had earlier about whether strategic design is sort of a skill set that you can build up in a way through education, through practicing, or whether it's more actually a mindset. It's a way of mindfully engage in specific processes or projects, and activate certain mindset at certain times. And within that, it's more a facilitating aspect, maybe. Yeah. Also, now I think we should move on actually to ask you about the future.
Oh, no.
Brian, how does your future look like? 2025, what's it giving to you? Do you have any exciting projects coming up or interesting events or anything that you're looking into?
I think 2025 is going to be, for me personally, it's going to be sort of a focus year. Now I've been an independent designer for almost 2 years. I've been sort of going in every sort of directions that things took me. And I think this year is about me focusing my energy on some of the things that I see more promising. So, for example, the fashion dreaming projects, that I really hope that continues, and that we get funding further developing that, because I see that as an example of bridging the very concrete and operational stuff of what some of the more fluffy things that we also talked about when it comes to sustainability and transformation. And then I hope to continue. To be honest, I just stepped out of a very long winter talking about the wheel, right?
Yeah.
So one of those phases where I'm just letting go and not trying to start too many things, and more evaluating. So what do I need to leave behind and what do I need to take on? And there's definitely quite a lot of things that we just talked about that I want to continue working on, and those curiosities. And then I've been thinking quite a lot. So my 10 years perspective is really similar to what I'm doing now. I think the next 10 years will be exploring these questions, bringing in these eating regenerative practices. But that's the word we have right now. But taking that more into the projects I'm doing. And then I have a really, really deep yearning for better understanding the inner systems of people and how that mirrors what is going on in the world. So I'm actually, last year, I finished education in hypnotherapy because I needed to challenge myself and get out of the comfort zone. And that gave me quite a lot of tools and also insights about the psychology that drives how we behave in the world and how we control what we are at what points or at what phases in our life. And I would very much like to explore that if you could see the inner nested systems within us and start taking a little bit more control of that on an individual level. So I think I will be starting, I've always been doing coaching and stuff like that, but I think I'll be doing even more of that, but maybe in a more profound level, introducing hypnosis and some of the more psychological aspects of that. Trying to truly create that inner sustainability with some individuals and see how can that also be part of how we do the facilitation of these bigger transformational projects. Because I see that people are really yearning for it and also controlling the despair, the hopelessness and stuff like that is surrounding us very much now.
Can you do the hypnosis on remote for maybe
some
people in the US? I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you hypnotize them? No. So inner sustainability.
Making him into a chicken. Like,
yeah, perfect. Retirement now. Okay, that sounds super interesting, Brian, with the hypnotherapy as well. So you keep on developing also your sort of competencies to see how you can engage in the field on various levels.
Yeah, very much. I think we all need to do that.
Yeah. Staying curious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And what role do you see strategic design play in the industry for this coming future? Will it be more prominent? Will we see it more? Or how do you see the future of strategic design?
We will definitely see it more. It might not be labeled as strategic design, but we'll have a lot more people working with taming these complex systems and trying to understand the connections between different levels in a strategic manner and filling those up with talking about the gray zones that we started in, sort of embracing those gray zones and try to fill them up with meaning. And then I think the skill sets of holding space as strategic designers has always been doing, whether it being holding space for a concept, for a new product that is doing something new and changing the business model, or is creating a strategy that creates a company more relevant in the industry, or working with sustainability at a planetary level. I think that ability to hold that space and stay curious and not jumping to conclusions, that would be something that we will need even more. And then the integrating ability of strategic designers, bringing both different professions, but most definitely also challenging the idea that if we just analyze our way through things, then we'll find the best solutions. Where I think the strategic designers will be more like, let's bring in all the perspectives and see if we can find something that can hold everything together. I think that will be something we'll see a lot more. I hope, as a sort of a proud design professional, that design will play a role, also get some of the credit for this, but that's secondary. If more people start working this kind of way, they can call it whatever they want.
And talking about getting people together, if someone is interested in planetary dreaming, how can they be a part of that? How can they get in contact? Or is that, are you looking for more people to join that community?
Always. Yeah. So we have a sort of a digital platform where we are continuously trying to collect the methods and stories that aligns with what we talked about today, and it's called planetarydreaming.org. And there's also contact information, stuff like that, to reach out. People can always reach out. I'm becoming a big fan of LinkedIn. I don't know why, because it's as any other social media thing, it's not ideal, but it's a really good way, I think, to connect as well with both me and Ida Engholm and whoever else is involved in this work. And then the Designwise method and the book is coming out, and that's there's a lot of opportunities to engage with that. Both there's a course and more courses coming at the Royal Academy that you can take, and there's also the online guides and stuff like that people could dig into.
Super good. Do you have any good books or podcasts you would like to recommend to our listeners if they want to know more about the field?
Our strategic design?
Yeah.
Yes, I think people should go to the forest and have a conversation with a tree.
Good suggestion.
And try to understand how a tree works. I have my own go-to tree in a forest nearby here that I go and have conversations with. I think there's a lot of resources out there. Obviously, they need to listen to your podcast, but then maybe even more importantly, than read and dig into some of all the other things that are happening in regard of transformation and stuff like that. I'm trying to come up with one book that just springs to mind and it's completely different from what we talked about, but a book two books that really fascinates me. One is one by a researcher called Karen O'Brien, who's looking into quantum physics related to social innovation, which is super interesting because she's defining this fractal innovation idea that the smallest changes has potentially the biggest impacts. She's super interesting. And then there's The Life of Plants by an Italian researcher. It's an essay. It's the most beautiful essay I ever read. And I don't remember his name. You can look it up. It's super, super nice. Short book, but where he sort of, in a very poetic but still scientific way, put out the idea that maybe humans are working for plants, since plants have been here before, and their ecosystem and their connectiveness is much more massive than humans, and that the humans are actually secondary. And how could we both learn from plants, but also how could we be better stewards and maybe live up to the way plants work? That's a super interesting and really thought-provoking book I read a few years ago.
And then we will ask you the final, most triggering question we have.
Oh, no.
How would you define strategic design in one sentence? Burning question.
Yeah. So I think strategic design is about realizing the potential in the between and in the connections between things.
Good. Yeah.
Perfect.
Strong.
Yep.
And you realized that on your bachelor's, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It took some years for me to realize that word happened, but
yeah. But it came to you there in the studio with all the organic shapes.
Yes, exactly. Oh my
Amazing.
God. Life is so simple. I mean,
it is simple.
Yeah.
Exactly. As it should be.
Exactly.
But thank you so much for joining our podcast, Brian.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
It's been a pleasure.
Very much indeed.
And if you want to listen to more episodes from Unfolding Strategic Design, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and on your preferred podcast app. And then you can listen to even more episodes where we unfold strategic design. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode of Unfolding Strategic Design, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Your support helps us bring in more inspiring voices from the world of strategic design.